Hey beautiful people. Do you want to complete your 120-hour TEFL course in just a few hours? Then listen up. My name is Nats. Today I'm going to take you through the Module 1 of the TEFL Universal course. I've enrolled at TEFL Universal. You can find the link in the description box. It's really super cheap and really easy. You have 6 months to complete the course, and it consists of 10 modules, with a quiz at the end of each module, of 15 multiple choice questions, and you need 40% to pass. But even if you're doing another course, I'm certain that these videos will assist you to pass and prepare you for your online teaching adventure. If you're on a similar journey, please subscribe, like and share. There's also a PDF of the module in the description box, if you need it. Contents of Module 1. 1.1. Characteristics of English in relation to learners in the TEFL environment. 1.2. Frequently used acronyms in the TEFL environment. 1.3. A very brief history of some ELT methods. 1.4. Teaching approaches, methods and techniques. 1.5 Total focus on communicative language teaching, CLT. 1.6. L1 and L2 learning. 1.7. Key influences on L2 learning. Section 1.1. Characteristics of English in relation to learners in the TEFL environment. We're going to go through characteristics of English. Some make English easier to learn as a second language learner, and some may pose difficulties for the learner. 1. English is fairly easy to learn. Relatively speaking, English is one of the easier languages in the world. Of course, it depends on the learner's ability and previous language learning experiences. Nevertheless, it's fair to say that English is a relatively easy language to learn, understand and speak when compared to very complex languages such as Arabic, Cantonese, Mandarin, Korean and Japanese. 2. It uses the Latin alphabet. It is the most universal alphabet. It is also short and straightforward. Only the Greek alphabet is shorter and simpler. Also, English represents the Latin alphabet purest form as a true alphabet with only 26 basic letters. 3. It uses simple inflection. Inflection is when we add extra letters to nouns, verbs, and adjectives to change their grammatical forms, e.g., cat and cats. Eat and eats. Big and bigger. English is considered to be a weakly inflected language when compared to, say, French or Russian. Its nouns have only traces of inflection plurals, the pronouns and its regular verbs have only 4 forms, e.g., look, looks, looked, looking. Even for irregular verbs, there is almost no variation in person except the third person singular in the present tense, e.g., I eat, you eat, she eats. 4. Receptiveness. A significant feature of the English language is its receptiveness to accepting and adopting words from other languages. Here are a few examples. From Spanish. Alligator, from el lagarto meaning the lizard. From Indian. Bungalow, from the Hindi word bangla, a type of cottage built for early European settlers in Bengal. From Chinese. Ketchup, from the Hokkien Chinese term kai siap, a sauce made from fermented fish. Europeans later added tomato as an ingredient. And I thought it was American, English has accepted and adopted words from Asian, European, African, Indian, Japanese, Chinese, and other languages. Also, English has accepted words from classical languages like Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit. 5. It's generally fixed word order. Another strong characteristic of the English language is its typically fixed word order. Most English sentences or clauses conform to the SVO word order. This means that the subject comes before the verb, which comes before the object. Examples. I bought B a new top O. Or, she doesn't like beat spiders O. There are other word orders in English, but the SVO order is by far the most used, making it easy for learners to grasp. 6. Pronunciation. The pronunciation of English words such as this, thin, clothes, 13th and months inevitably causes problems for learners who do not need to use the tip of the tongue to produce words in their language. 7. Continuous tense. Many languages do not have a continuous tense form, so English learners may make mistakes such as, I had a bath when the phone rang, instead of I was having a bath when the phone rang. 8. Articles a, and, the. The article system is another feature of English grammar that causes some learners enormous difficulties, those whose native language does not use articles. 9. Phrasal verbs. A phrasal verb such as break down to see to, or look down on are an idiomatic phrase consisting of a verb and another item, typically either an adverb or preposition and sometimes both. These phrasal verbs are extremely common in colloquial, informal, everyday, conversational English language and can cause severe difficulties for learners. Sentences such as I put it down to the weather, or I made it up with my sister, are usually difficult to beginner non-native English speakers. 10. Non-tonal. English is mostly a non-tonal language. In tonal languages, e.g., Chinese and Vietnamese, pitch, the degree of highness or lowness of a tone, is used to distinguish word meaning. So a word said with a high pitch may have a different meaning from the same word said with a low pitch. In English, changes in pitch are used to emphasize or express emotion, not to give a different word meaning to the sound. It is not surprising that native speakers of tone languages often have strong accents when speaking English. 11. Sound and spelling. A final feature of English that causes problems for non-native learners and some native English speakers is the lack of a connection between word sound and word spelling. It is difficult for non-native learners of English to predict the pronunciation of English words they first come across in writing or the spelling of many English words they first hear. The critical point is that this happens with some of the most common words in the language. Words containing ow, thought, although, rough. Words which have different spellings but they sound the same, ate, here, there. Words with silent letters, not pronounced, no, could, our. Words that look the same but must be pronounced differently, read present tense, read past tense. Present, a gift present, to give to. Close, near. Close to shut. To summarize section 1.1. Some characteristics of English make English easier to learn as a second language learner and some may pose difficulties for the learner. 1. English is fairly easy to learn when compared to some other languages. 2. It uses the Latin alphabet which is universal, short and easy. 3. It uses simple inflections, so it is easier for learners to change the grammatical meaning to words like cat and cats are big and bigger as there are very few letters that need to be added. 4. Receptiveness to adopting words from other languages. The word jungle comes from the Hindi word jingao. 5. It's generally fixed word order, subject, verb then object. I kicked the ball. 6. Pronunciation of words that require use the tip of the tongue may prove difficult for learners whose native language does not require the same. An example would be the th sound in words like thin or months. 7. Continuous tense. Many languages do not have a continuous tense form, so English learners may make mistakes such as, I had a bath when the phone rang, instead of saying I was having a bath when the phone rang. 8. Articles a, n, that may prove difficult for learners whose native language does not use articles. 9. Phrasal verbs such as to look down on can be difficult for some learners to grasp as they see things quite literally. 10. English is mostly a non-tonal language. So, a word said with a high pitch may have a different meaning from the same word said with a low pitch. 11. The discrepancy between sound and spelling of some words may be challenging for learners, words such as 8 and 8. 1.2. Frequently used acronyms in the TEFL environment. ELT, English Language Teaching, umbrella term which aims to include everything in the teaching English field. TEFL, Teaching English as a Foreign Language, and EFL, English as a Foreign Language, are perhaps the most common terms. TESOL, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, is another umbrella term, similar to ELT. In the USA, Canada and Australia, the term TESOL, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, is much more widely used than TEFL, but the concept is much the same. TEYL, Teaching English to Young Learners, is within TEFL and is geared to teaching young learners of English. TESL, Teaching English as a Second Language, is teaching immigrants in English-speaking countries. CLT, Communicative Language Teaching, is an umbrella term for learner-centered, authentic, and meaningful language acquisition principles that inform the most widely practiced language teaching approach used in second language learning classrooms today. It is also referred to as the communicative approach. Our course will follow this approach. L1 is the term used for a learner's first language, the learner's native language. L2 stands for the second language a learner is learning. Your learner's L2 will be English. PPP, presentation, practice, production, is a widely used model of classroom teaching for lesson planning and lesson delivery. Some learning providers call this the I do, we do, you do model of teaching. STT, student talking time, is the amount of time that learners spend talking in class, ideally as much as possible. TTT, teacher talking time, is the amount of time you spend talking during a class, ideally as little as possible and much less than STT. That concludes section 1.2. I will not be summarizing the shorter or less important sections. 1.3. A very brief history of some ELT methods. Over the years, there has been a wide range of approaches used to teach EFL. We will summarize some of these traditional approaches. Language is a matter of speech, and so classroom work concentrates almost exclusively on speaking. From the 1970s onwards, other approaches arose, principally to counter the mimic-heavy, pattern-based teaching approaches of the previous decades. All these approaches have had different degrees of success. Remember this. It would be silly not to recognize that all of these approaches have included some teaching elements that have been useful at some time or another for teaching. 1.4. Teaching approaches, methods and techniques. 1.4.1. Approaches, methods, techniques. An approach is a way of looking at teaching and learning and of how it can be learned. An approach gives rise to methods, the way of teaching language items, e.g., via classroom activities or techniques. A method is how a language is taught. A method is made up of a set of techniques that usually reflect a particular view of language teaching. Example. The communicative approach is the most popular and most current approach to language teaching. Task-based teaching is a methodology associated with teaching the communicative approach. Other methods are also associated with teaching the communicative approach. However, to confuse matters, some methods have also been labeled approaches. 1.4.2. Most recent methods techniques. Here is a list of the most popular methods of teaching ELT. 1.5 Total focus on communicative language teaching, CLT. The main principles of the communicative approach you will be using can be summarized as follows. Communication. Classroom work aims to help learners reach an effective standard of communication outside the classroom. Accuracy in grammar and pronunciation are important, but these are less important than the ability to communicate meaningfully in real life, even if there are some mistakes in the language. There is a strong emphasis on listening and speaking, but lessons can include reading and writing. This depends on school policy and learner needs. The principal achievement goal of communicative language teaching is to enable learners to communicate knowledge and opinions surrounding a topic in the target language, English. Attempts to communicate are encouraged from the very first lesson. Practice activities are put in communicative contexts, wherever possible. So, there is frequent use of role plays, discussions, etc. At all levels. Meaning and use. Language learning is mainly about learning to communicate effectively. So, the primary emphasis is always on the meaning and use of language items. Context. New language items are presented and practiced in realistic and meaningful contexts which show their meaning and use. It is the context that gives language meaning. Simply put, the language necessary for buying a train ticket would be said in a train station, the context. Fluency. It is assumed that the ability to communicate effectively in a language will result from a combination of formal learning of rules and holistic acquisition. Creativity. Language learning and acquisition are creative processes, and they involve trial and error on the part of the learner. The learner should be encouraged to try out language items in a supportive classroom environment and, with your help, he will learn from his mistakes. Functions. To do this, the underlying premise is that learners need to be able to go beyond the learning of the grammatical structure of a language and into the functions, e.g., buying a bus ticket, ordering a meal, applying for a job, or areas and ways such utterances are used in communication in the real world. Form. Linguistic competence is only part of the whole picture of language acquisition. Learners must be able to choose the most appropriate form for a situation, such as when to use could you or would you as an issue of register or politeness. Register is a variety of a language or a level of usage, as determined by the degree of formality and choice of lexis, pronunciation, and syntax grammar according to the communicative purpose, social context, and standing of the user. For example, we generally use a different variety of language when we speak to our doctor than we do when speaking to our friends, unless the doctor is a close friend. Learners must also recognize that a variety of forms can be used to achieve the same end or function, such as it may rain and perhaps it will rain, each of which achieves the same communicative purpose, which is the possibility of rain. Teacher role in CLT. Your emphasis must always be on communication in English. Your role is to facilitate, help, and advise your learners, and also to be a language resource. The core principle is that you do not teach, as in the past, but instead help and facilitate your learners to learn or acquire. The classroom is learner-centered or learning-centered, with many activities taking place in pairs or groups, monitored and unobtrusively facilitated by you. Individual learning preferences. Your learners will have different learning needs and preferences. You will, therefore, need to use whichever techniques you feel will help your learners most. That is, on occasion, you may discuss grammar rules if this helps your learners. Remember this: grammar is never taught in isolation unless it is absolutely necessary. Real English. In some parts of lessons, learners will be exposed to fine-tuned input language that are within the learner's knowledge. In other parts, they will be exposed to rough-tuned input language which is a little above the learner's level. Even in beginner classes, learners will be exposed to examples of authentic English, newspaper articles, etc. Occasional structured drills. Remember this: drilling means repetition. It involves your learners, either individually or as a group, repeating whatever you say. Drilling is a way for your learners to practice new language, e.g., lexis, grammatical structures, and pronunciation, in a controlled setting. Oral drilling and classroom-type exercises may occupy a small proportion of lesson time. They are ways of helping learners with pronunciation, grammar patterns, etc. To summarize 1.5 total focus on communicative language teaching, CLT. To obtain communicative competence via the communicative approach, lessons need integration of the following. Situation context. The situations one encounters in life, e.g., meeting a new friend. Going to the doctor. A meaningful context is set. Functions. Functions are speech acts that learners are likely to face, e.g., seeking advice, requesting information, expressing gratitude, complimenting someone, expressing requests, asking permission, complaining, etc. Form. Socio-linguistic language used in a social setting, social niceties, social situations, formal v informal expressions, etc. You will integrate socio-linguistic competence such as acceptable and unacceptable ways to complain, as well as strategies and methods to overcome communication breakdown when it happens. Meaning and use. These will be linked to the form. Grammar. Always taught in context. It is linked to materials related to conversation, reading, listening, and writing. It is never taught in isolation unless it is necessary. Notions. Days of the week, dates, months, should be introduced in context. For example, in lesson planning, you will determine how to adapt these competencies to learner needs. To do this, you could choose a situation such as a visit to a doctor. Present the language functions such as giving formal greetings, requesting advice, giving advice, demonstrating gratitude. Present the form related to the situation and its meaning and usage. Choose the necessary grammar and lexis to complete the exercise. Construct and choose communicative activities for the learners to practice and produce. So, this integrated communicative approach is the one we will focus on. It's an exciting approach where skills are integrated. Each of your lessons may include a bit of speaking, listening, writing, and reading, where possible. The achievement goal at all times is to enable learners to communicate knowledge and opinions surrounding a topic in the target language, English. There'll be very few standalone grammar lessons, but you will still need a sound grasp of basic grammar so that you can handle queries and questions seamlessly. We'll be tackling bits of grammar in various parts of the course. It's not too stretching. 1.6. L1 and L2 and Second Language Acquisition, SLA. So, there are some significant differences between L1 and L2 learning. Remember these, and another piece will be in place in your Good Teacher Jigsaw. 1.7. Key influences on L2 learning. Why do some L2 learners learn faster and better than others? Here are some vital points for you to remember and reflect on regularly when you are on the job. They are not in any specific order. Degree of intellect. Some L2 learners are just brighter than others. If they are motivated to learn, they will achieve higher levels of learning. Age. So many studies have been carried out to prove or disprove that age is or isn't a key influence on learning. None have achieved their purpose successfully. When we compare SLA with, say, learners at age 6, 16, 26, or 56, there are so many other variables involved. How can the acquisition of a 6-year-old with an open mind and no cares in the world be compared to the acquisition of a 26-year-old who is learning part-time and has lots of concerns? There is no definitive answer. However, our experience tells us that, generally, the older a person becomes, the more difficult it is to acquire a second language. Even although that older person has a broader view of the world and more extensive experiences, he also has many more things requiring his focus and concentration. Learning preference. If the teaching is not carried out in line with the learner's preferred learning approach, e.g., lots of visuals or lots of audio or lots of discussions and activities, etc., learning may very well be curtailed. We will explore learning preferences later. Motivation. Whether this is intrinsic learning for its own sake or extrinsic for some goal or reward, e.g., securing a new job, every learner has varying degrees of motivation. It's also challenging to keep learners motivated all of the time. Remember this. The whole person comes to school, be it your learners or you. Learners have their ups and downs. They come with all their personal baggage, e.g., worrying about a sick parent-child, or upset due to a breakdown in some personal relationship. So, the motivated person yesterday may not be the motivated person today. Help and show empathy wherever you can. And the same applies to you. You may feel a little bit down due to some personal issue. Alternatively, you may have had just one too many social events the nights before. You'll need to make a supreme effort not to let these events affect your teaching. Your learners need you to be constant, i.e., positive, welcoming and full of life all the time. Language proficiency in L1. There's no doubt that a learner who is proficient in her L1 language grammar, structure, mood, etc., and understands all of this, has a great head start when learning in L2. Awareness of L2. Again, a learner will have a great head start on others if she already has an awareness of the L2, perhaps through living in a bilingual environment. These were easy for you. Let's ramp it up a bit. Now, let's look at some trickier additional issues that we have come across in our years of teaching EFL. Autonomy. Some educators say that learners should play a more active role in designing or selecting learning experiences in schools. This approach can encourage learners to be more interested in school, more motivated to learn, and more likely to take responsibility for their education. Studies have shown that as learner autonomy increases, so does learner motivation. And, thus, so do learning results. An example of autonomy would be to let learners pick from a list of topics to debate instead of being told what to do. Of course, there are those learners who shy away from autonomy. These learners want the teacher to lead them. However, generally, the more autonomy there is, the better the learning results will be. Prior learning. Learners may bring to class their expectations regarding teacher relationships, teacher behavior and teacher approaches to learning that prevailed in their home countries, especially if they had extensive schooling there. Therefore, some learners from more traditional educational systems may expect you to behave in a more formal and authoritarian fashion during classes. They may be displeased, puzzled, or offended if you use an informal instructional style, such as using their first names in class or allowing the learners to move freely around the room. They may believe that this will affect their learning. When teaching learners, you must try to find out how they have learned previously and how they would prefer to learn in your classroom. Simply put, you need to ask them. Pattern of classroom activity. Some learners may also want you to maintain a clearly ordered pattern of classroom activity and, perhaps, engage in extensive correction of grammatical form or pronunciation during all activities rather than at irregular points in a lesson or not at all. Failure to conform to these ideals may give some learners the impression of lazy or inadequate class preparation on your part. Your behavior. You, similarly, bring to the classroom your expectations regarding teacher behavior. This includes your views on appropriate behavior within society in general, as well as in the classroom. For example, if you come from a culture of self-reliance, are at ease in expressing and defending personal opinions, and are interested in personal advancement, you will likely provide instruction that addresses these goals. You may unconsciously attribute these same goals to your learners. The potential for conflicting expectations and evaluations of behavior between you and your learners is evident. Gender. Find out whether learners have ever experienced mixed educational groupings, whether they expect male and female teachers to behave differently, and how different classroom activities, e.g., role plays or dialogue practice, might affect learners adversely because of their native cultural constraints. Failure on your part to take this into account may affect learner learning. Female participation. In encouraging women learners to speak up and take an active role in class, you may sometimes encounter reluctance from both men and women from cultures in which women have historically been constrained by social roles that do not promote active participation in mixed-sex settings. You must reflect on this point continuously. Culture. Appropriate topics for learning. Cultural expectations regarding the nature of education and what is appropriate to talk about may also affect the kinds of topics learners are willing to pursue in class and their motivation to learn. Cultural as well as personal sensitivity is vital in knowing if, when, and how to introduce topics or lessons that may be inappropriate for some, or complicated. Classroom participation. The communicative classroom creates a lively, vibrant environment. This is generally a motivating learning environment for those who enjoy working with others. But not always. What about the learner who prefers to work alone? Verbally expressing ideas and asking questions during class can prove difficult for learners who are unaccustomed to this form of active and lively pair and group participation. And what about the situation where a learner loves to be with the same partner all of the time, in a pair? She may not like being moved into a group. There are communicative approach proponents who see pair work and group work as the answer to everything. This is not the case. We need to observe well and consider our learners' preferences, at least for some of the time. A. Direct style. B. Indirect style. Direct style. Here are the key indicators of a direct style of communication presented by the teacher and, perhaps, some learners in the classroom. Straightforward talking. No beating about the bush, straight and to the point. Directness means there is respect for the other person. Avoiding ambiguity. Here are the key indicators of an indirect style of communication presented by the teacher and, perhaps, some learners in the classroom. Indirect style. Meaning is conveyed by subtle means, stories, implication, not getting to the point. Indirectness means politeness and respect for the other person. Frequent use of implication, not directness. 1.8. Effective learning strategies. Language learning strategies are the conscious steps or behaviors used by language learners to enhance the acquisition, storage, retention, recall, and use of new information. The more proficient learners use learning strategies that are appropriate to the material, to the task, and their own goals, needs, and stage of learning. For example, strategies could be techniques such as diaries, think aloud procedures, observations, and surveys. More proficient learners appear to use a broader range of strategies in a significant number of situations than less skilled learners. For example, more proficient learners employ appropriate language learning strategies that often result in improved proficiency or achievement overall or in specific skill areas. Tend to use strategies that work well together and which are tailored to the requirements of the language task. These learners can easily explain the strategies they use and why they employ them. Use metacognitive strategies, such as translating and analyzing, and other strategies, such as planning and organizing. Using combinations of strategies often has more impact than relying on a single strategy. Use specific strategies or clusters of strategies that are linked to particular language skills or tasks. Learners may have created their own strategies or may have picked up some strategies from their teachers, their parents or siblings, or their friends. They may also have gained some useful strategies from a library or internet search. There are many different and preferred strategies that learners may use. The following list is not definitive, but it will give you a good idea of the commonly used types of strategies that some learners use. Note that no definitive list of strategies has been agreed on by language researchers. Anyhow, you can pass on some of these ideas to those of your learners who have no concrete strategies for learning and studying. Circumlocution. This is best explained via an example. The more proficient learner doesn't know the word nephew, but she doesn't give up. So, she uses different words or phrases to express the intended meaning, e.g., my brother's son. Avoidance. Avoidance is where a more proficient learner may learn to avoid talking about topics for which she lacks the necessary lexis or other language skills. She may also come to a halt mid-utterance once she realizes she does not have the language resources needed to complete her communication. Word coinage. This is the term for more proficient learners creating new words or phrases for words that they do not know. For example, the learner doesn't know the word freezer and she constructs and uses a new word ice cabinet instead. Language switching or code switching. This is where a more proficient learner doesn't know a word and uses a word with the same meaning from her first language, hoping that her communication partner will understand. For example, my aunt and uncle are coming for Christmas. They will be staying chez nous. Clarification and comprehension checks. Some learners are often too shy or embarrassed to say anything when they do not understand the other speaker. More proficient learners, however, use clarification and comprehension checks. For example, for clarification check, do you mean? Could you explain what you mean by? Could you give me an example, please? For comprehension check, sorry, I don't understand. Sorry, I don't know what you mean. Sorry, I'm not sure I'm following you. Note that this appeal for assistance may also be done indirectly via a puzzled expression, raising eyebrows, etc. Nonverbal strategies. This refers to strategies such as the use of body language, gestures, mime, facial expressions, sound imitation to support or replace verbal communication. Approximation. This is where the more proficient learner uses an alternative term that approximates the meaning of the target word or phrase as closely as possible. For example, she may say ship instead of the more difficult word yacht. Use of all-purpose words. When the more proficient learner lacks a specific word in a conversation, she may use a general, empty lexical word or phrase to replace it. For example, stuff, thingy. Using minimal responses. More proficient learners build up a stock of minimal responses to help them engage. Minimal responses are predictable phrases that conversation participants use to indicate understanding, agreement, doubt, and other responses to what another speaker is saying. For example, oh, I see. Is that so? That's good. Oh, sorry. I didn't catch that. These minimal responses enable a learner to concentrate on what the other participant is saying, without having to plan a reply simultaneously. Recognizing scripts, patterns, opportunities. More proficient learners understand that many communication situations are associated with a predictable set of spoken exchanges. For example, greetings, compliments, apologies, invitations, and other functions that are influenced by social and cultural norms often follow scripts or patterns. For example, can I help you? Yes, please. It's the same with exchanges involved in activities such as obtaining information and making a purchase. In these scripts, the relationship between a speaker's turn and the one that follows it can often be anticipated. Fillers and hesitation devices. This is where the more proficient learner uses fillers or hesitation devices to fill pauses and to gain a bit of time to think. Fillers. As a matter of fact. Well, actually. To be honest, Frank. Hesitation devices, stalling for time to think. Smart goals. More proficient learners know how to set smart goals. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-based. Smart goals provide the benchmark, focus and plan for surging ahead. The more proficient learner also knows and understands what it is to be too ambitious. It will take lots of practice and lots of time before she can consider how fluent she is. But it will all be worth it in the end. Using authentic material and practicing in authentic situations. The more proficient learner listens to the teacher's advice that the best route to fluency is through consuming lots of authentic material. What is learned and practiced in the classroom is not enough. Consuming lots of authentic material outside the classroom, in different formats, is vital for fluency success. As is practicing the language in real-life situations with native speakers. Self-monitoring. The more proficient learner does not just rely on teacher comments and the institution's assessments to tell her how she is doing. She assesses her own capabilities frequently by taking relevant, external proficiency tests and quizzes. This helps her to further determine what areas she needs to develop. She knows that another way to assess her own skills without a proficiency test quiz is to think through what she's most comfortable with. If she had to communicate with a native speaker, would she feel more comfortable with listening to the native speaker, then responding in speech? Speaking with the native speaker and responding in speech? Writing to the native speaker? Reading about the native speaker and then responding to some questions? It's likely that the option she chooses is her strongest skill and, thus, she knows what other skills she needs to focus on. The 4 skills: listening, speaking, writing, reading. Finally, with regard to the 4 skills, the more proficient learner will likely demonstrate a cocktail of some of these strategies. Listening. Comprehension gains from strategies of elaboration, inference, selective attention, and self-monitoring. Speaking. Speaking demands strategies such as risk-taking, paraphrasing, circumlocution, self-monitoring, and self-evaluation. Writing. Writing benefits from the learning strategies of planning, self-monitoring, deduction, and substitution. Reading. Comprehension benefits from using strategies like reading aloud, guessing, deduction, and summarizing. Help your learners to develop and enhance their learning strategies so that, eventually, they will become independent learners with the ability to use robust strategies in a variety of contexts. That concludes this lesson, guys. I hope that you liked it. Please click on the next video for the next module. End of Module 1 quiz. You require 40% to pass this quiz. 1. Which of the following is incorrect? 1. Dash. TEFL and EFL are perhaps the most common terms. TESOL and TEFL concepts are generally much the same. The I do, we do, you do model is the same as the presentation, practice, production PPP model. There should be more teacher talking time TTT than student talking time STT. 2. A learner who has language proficiency in his L1 has a head start when learning in L2.1. True. False. 3. Students should always be exposed to fine-tuned input. 1. True. False. 4. In the statement, I put it down to experience, the underlined part is an example of 1. An adverb. An article. A phrasal verb. An adjective. 5. L2 is a student's native language. 1. True. False. 6. English has a predictable connection between word sound and word spelling. 1. True. False. 7. The dominant achievement goal of communicative language teaching is to enable students, 1. To listen in the target language. To communicate knowledge and opinions around a topic in the target language. To write well. To achieve accuracy in grammar and punctuation in the target language. 8. Functions are speech acts that students are likely to face, e.g. making a request. 1. True. False. 9. Less proficient L2 learners use the same range and number of learning strategies as proficient L2 learners. 1. True. False. 10. The name for extra letters added to nouns, verbs and adjectives in their different grammatical forms is 1. Pitch. Inflection. Diacritics. Receptiveness. 11. The English language's word order is typically 1. Verb then subject then object VSO. Subject then object then verb SOV. Subject then verb then object SVO. Object then verb then subject OVS. 12. English is a tonal language. 1. True. False. 13. Communicative language teaching CLT is a broad term for 1. Learner-centered, authentic and meaningful language acquisition principles. Teaching English to speakers of other languages. Everything in the teaching English arena. Teacher-centered, authentic and meaningful language acquisition principles. 14. Which of the following is correct? 1. L1 and L2 learners are regularly corrected. L1 and L2 learn in controlled settings with controlled activities. L1 and L2 learners learn language differently. L1 and L2 learners are praised to the same degree. 15. It's imperative that you try to find out how your students have learned previously and how they prefer to learn now. 1. True. False. So go for it and try out the quiz. You can pause the video now and click on the next video to get to the next module.